Okay, so I'm Lynn Reese. I'm the Associate Director of the library, and this is Neurodiversity 101. It basically has to do with autism, ADHD, and various things like that. So this is sort of a consciousness raising, just give you familiarity with what it's all about and what to expect, and maybe how to help smooth things along. So here's what we're going to cover. Basically, what is neurodiversity? Some examples. We're going to concentrate on ADHD and actually primarily autism, because I'm autistic and that's what I know. Terminology, language, and models of disability, some myths, challenges, how we're going to address those. Okay, so first, what's neurodiversity? Essentially, it's the idea that that the human brain has a range of normal, as opposed to there's regular people and then there's autistic people and then there's, so that it's a range. And so it's not, the neurodiversity community tends to not look at autism as a pathology, same with ADHD, but more as a variation. So some examples: autism spectrum disorder, and that includes Asperger's syndrome, which is now considered part of autism, ADHD, dyslexia, OCD, and I have DSM-5 handouts for OCD, ADHD, and ASD available if you want them. And then sometimes Tourette syndrome, bipolar, and some other things are included in there, but that's less common. Okay, so let's talk about terminology for a minute. So neurodivergent is one of the terms that you'll hear, and essentially that means people who are differently wired. So it's kind of the equivalent of you run on Windows and I run on Mac. And so sometimes you can't transfer one to another so easily. Neurotypical is just people who fit the norm, the dominant culture. Allistic, which I see once in a while, just basically means not autistic. Stimming, which I will get back to later, is self-stimulating behavior.
Right on cue.
Yeah. And masking is the attempt to hide autism or ADHD or whatever that is. And that's actually not a healthy thing necessarily, although necessary to survive sometimes. So I want to talk about identity first versus person first. Usually when we talk about disability issues, you'll hear people say that they'd rather be identified as the person first. I am a person with a disability. But in certain cultures, and in deaf culture and in the neurodivergent culture in particular, the tendency, and this is not unanimous, none of this is unanimous, but the tendency is to want to go with identity first. So rather than saying, I am a person with autism, I say I am autistic. And that is because it's a central part of who we are. It's not like you still have the muscular dystrophy is not the person, but for me, the autism is the person. That's who I am, that's how I operate. And again, people vary on this. So out of that comes different models of disability, medical versus social. Medical is sort of what's been the norm historically, and that is basically the deficit you need to bring in the person. So the focus is on fixing the person, fixing whatever is wrong, fixing behavior, fixing the physical issue, whatever. And then there's a social model of disability, and that is more common now with the ADA, and that is that the deficit isn't so much with the person, but with the environment that's not common. Now, there's such a wide range of autistic disability or condition, if you will, that there are some people who are never going to be able to live on their own. There are some people who do okay with some support. So it's going to be there's certainly going to have to be some intervention, sometimes on both sides of that. But primarily that the autistic community sees themselves as more fitting to the social model. And this is, I don't know if you've seen this before, but basically this is a slogan for the disability community. And that is because, for example, with deaf people, there was all of the, Gallaudet University and all of those had nobody who was deaf on the faculty. And same with autism. The primary organization had no autistics on the board. It's still problematic, although that's controversial, and I'm not going to get into that. Okay, so isn't everybody a little bit autistic? I used to say that when I was wondering whether I was or not. The answer is no. There is a specific criteria for diagnosis, but it is true that everybody shares those traits now and then. Sometimes everybody loses their keys, or forgets the phone number, or can't recognize the person that they know very well, or whatever. The thing is, it's a difference between whether it's a clinical condition versus whether it's stuff that just kind of gets in the way sometimes. So it's sort of like the analogy is the difference between sadness and depression. You can say that you're sad sometimes, but that's very different from saying that you have depression. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I know when I've said it, it was well-meaning, but the problem is that to the person who's autistic, it basically trivializes their experience. Because if I say, oh, well, I know how you feel, everybody's a little autistic, then that says that your struggles can't possibly be that bad. So that's why that's problematic. Okay, so I'm going to start with ADHD, and I'm not ADHD that I know of. I probably would be if I was actually evaluated, but because I think people should speak for themselves, I am going to, and I hope this works. If it doesn't, oh well. Yeah, that's not going to work. Go back. Okay, how do we do this?
Click on the video link.
Okay, yeah, I'll do that. So this is a YouTuber who is.
We saved $85 by literally clicking twice and installing a free browser add-on. Hun, anytime you check out.
Hello, brains, and probably people sent here by brains. I get it. It can be hard to understand ADHD and.
Hang on. I don't know.
Yeah.
Will you fix it when we go back?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hello, brains, and probably people sent here by brains. I get it. It can be hard to understand ADHD and even harder to explain it to others. Most ADHD behaviors are things everyone struggles with once in a while. Losing your keys, spacing out during a conversation, forgetting to turn in an assignment. Sound familiar? Yeah, and when someone with ADHD does these things a lot, it's easy to assume that it means the same thing as if someone without ADHD does them. Once in a while is understandable, but if it happens a lot, they must not care, or not be trying hard enough, or not be very good at stuff. But before we judge their behavior or write them off as a bad whatever, it's important to remember behavior is affected by the brain, and ADHD brains develop and function much differently from average or neurotypical brains. Those differences can be valuable, which is why as someone with ADHD, I wouldn't trade my brain for the world. But without the right support, they can also be incredibly impairing. The struggle is real. It's also invisible, which can make it very hard to see. So to help you understand what it's like inside the brain of your ADHD person, we reached out to our community of ADHD brains, as well as the community at understood.org to ask how they explain it. For example, fun fact, despite the name, we don't actually have a deficit of attention. When we forget to change the laundry or have trouble focusing in class, it's because our brains have trouble regulating or effectively shifting our attention. So sometimes our brains jump from one thing to the next, and other times our brains actually zero in or hyper-focus on one thing, and it can be hard for us to pull ourselves away. As Eric Peterson puts it, neurotypical brains have a 1 through 10 dial they use to regulate their attention. With ADHD brains, our dials have 2 options, random and 15. And this applies to all aspects of our lives. The ability to regulate attention is part of something called the executive function system. It's kind of like our brain's self-management system, what allows us to plan, prioritize, and sustain effort toward a goal, say making dinner, without getting sidetracked. It's what allows us to inhibit or not act on our impulses and ignore distractions so we can stay on task and switch when it's time to switch. In the ADHD brain, executive functions develop much more slowly than in neurotypical brains. And we have a deficit in the brain chemicals that help them function. So we usually know what to do and have the best intentions, but our executive function system isn't always developed or functioning well enough to effectively help us. frustrating for us as it is for anyone else. Haley Melville explains it like this. Your brain is like a secretary, and you're the CEO in a meeting, doing a task. In a neurotypical brain, their secretary greets guests, potential distractions, lets them know that the CEO is in a meeting, and either encourages them to make an appointment or shows them the door. My secretary either lets everyone into the meeting or lets no one in, even if it's something important. Another executive function is working memory. That's our ability to temporarily hold information in our head so we can work with it. Like look at a recipe and then remember the steps while we cook. It's our brain's version of RAM. Everyone has a limited capacity of working memory, but it's often more limited in those with ADHD, which is one reason we might blurt out an answer before we forget it, or ask you to repeat what you just said. Timothy Warnke says, it's like my brain is a whiteboard, and I have to write down everything that's happening right away, but I write kind of big, so pretty soon I have to erase a bunch of stuff to make more room. By the way, that's also why we tend to have trouble following multi-step directions. It's also why Post-it notes are helpful. Another fun fact about ADHD, not everyone with ADHD is hyperactive, at least not on the outside. ADHD has 3 different presentations, and they can change over time. So even if someone doesn't look like they have ADHD, they still might. Even if they're not bouncing around the room, their brain might be. It's often referred to as internal restlessness, and it's exhausting. Diana DeVader Murray explains her mind like being on a hamster wheel you can't ever get off of. Deborah Cradaville says it's like a pinball machine with the ball constantly hitting and bouncing between all the bumpers. All this energy can be great when we can direct it well. It often shows up as creativity, generosity, curiosity. We tend to think outside the box, and we're 3 times more likely to start our own business. But for us to take advantage of our brain's strengths, it's important that we learn to manage our ADHD, which often means using a combination of medication and other strategies. ADHD expert Dr. Ned Hallowell explains it like this. Having ADHD is like having a race car engine for a brain. It's very powerful, and it can propel you to win races. There's just one problem. You have bicycle brakes. But with the help of a brake specialist, you learn to strengthen your brakes and control that powerful engine. Then your race car stops spinning out on turns and starts winning races. Because we do tend to crash a lot while we're building up those brakes, those of us with ADHD tend to get corrected or teased more often than our peers. And unfortunately, another aspect of ADHD can make that extra painful for us. Our brains don't just have trouble regulating our attention, they have trouble regulating our emotions too. Jennifer Peterson explains, when it comes to emotional dysregulation, it's like I have a really bad sunburn. Even a playful slap on the back hurts so bad. If you didn't know some of these things about ADHD, don't worry, I didn't either until a couple of years ago, and I actually have it. I thought I was just too sensitive, or a space cadet, or weird, because that's what I was always told, and I'm not alone. That's why ADHD Brains made this video, and why we hope you'll share it. When our ADHD symptoms are seen as personality defects, it can be hurtful, and worse, we believe it. It takes a huge toll on our self-esteem and can lead to other conditions like anxiety and depression. And honestly, it's really confusing. As Komiendo Viscocho puts it, it's like being the smartest, stupidest, most motivated, and laziest person in the room, all at the same time. But if we and others understand what our challenges are, we can accept them, find strategies to help us work through them, and more importantly, stop beating ourselves up about them so we can focus on more important things, like what we're good at. And we can stop writing off ourselves or others for being different and start appreciating what that difference can bring to the world. Thanks for watching. There's a lot more to learn if you're curious, so check out some of our other videos, links in the description, and head over to understood.org to experience what it's like to have ADHD and other conditions with their tool through your child's eyes. Remember though, ADHD looks different for everybody, and those with ADHD often have other conditions as well. So the best way to understand somebody's brain is to ask them about it. Thank you to our Brain Board and all our Patreon brains for supporting us through the process of making this video. Check out our daily vlogs on Patreon to see how we did it, and to our community.
Okay. A lot of that is true for autistics as well. So that was one of the reasons that I felt like it was worth it to just go ahead and show the whole video. Plus, as I said, I can't really speak for ADHD. Yes, I would. Thank you. Oh my God. Okay, so let me move on then. And now what we're going to do is talk about autism specifically, where is the little mousy thing?
Left corners.
Yes,
All right, so let's talk about autistic statistics for a moment. What nine?
I don't think so, but
Okay.
is she asking?
But I think she's confused. So let me.
Okay, if not, I mean, we can always take a look at her documentation.
Yeah. Okay.
I can hear. If you can mute, that would be wonderful. So that's a CDC statistic. Nearly 2/3 of autistic kids aged 6 to 15 have been bullied. I mention that because we're talking about college kids who probably are coming from that environment. And only 56% of them finish high school. 95% have at least one common co-occurring condition. Anxiety, depression, ADHD. 30% of autistic children are non-speaking. That doesn't mean that they remain non-speaking or that they can't communicate, but at some point they are non-speaking. And then 31% of autistic children have no intellectual disability. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean that that can't be overcome. Okay, so more statistics. More than half of the young adults, this really struck me, when young adults who graduate from high school who have autism, more than half of them will spend the next 2 years not going to college and not working. And only in the UK, only 32% have any kind of paid work, and only 16% are employed full-time. So the fact that we get students in here who are autistic is pretty wonderful. Okay, so DSM-5, I handed out the DSM-5 for autism, and we'll go into some detail here. But just very quickly to go through it first, persistent deficits in social communication and interactions, repetitive motions, special interests. In order to be diagnosed, the symptoms have to have started in early childhood, and there has to be clinical significant impairment, and it can't be explained by some other condition. So, some common traits. There are issues with eye contact, being at ease with others, and I'm going to go into most of these in a little more detail momentarily. Communication, and just in terms of, we are very, very literal, and I'll give examples of that. We have difficulty hearing sometimes. If I'm in a noisy restaurant, I can't hear what's going on. I thought it was a hearing loss, but it turns out it's autism. Sensory issues, repetitive behaviors, stimming, problems with changes in routine, special interests, and that's something I don't really address later. We're sort of famous for that, we have, for me right now, I just bought a new camera, so I can watch 18 hours of YouTube videos on how to run this camera, and I'll be perfectly happy. And we do have the ability to hyperfocus, and that can be a really good thing or it can be a bad thing. If we're conversing with somebody, we could sort of forget to let the subject move on. On the other hand, this is how we get to know so much stuff, is because we're like totally into it. And then something that was surprising to me is issues with gross and fine motor skills, which I will also talk about. So, as I mentioned before, ASD comes with a lot of comorbidities. ADHD and OCD is very common. Depression and anxiety, I have that. Gastrointestinal problems, epilepsy, eating disorders, I have that. Sleep disorders, addiction, recovery. So, I'm not unique. Everybody is different. But yeah, there's generally some stuff going on. As I said, 95% of people have some kind of co-occurring condition. So, myths and misconceptions. The first one I want to address is that neurodivergence is a tragedy. It is. I don't want to minimize the level of need that some people have for intervention and the difficulty that it is for the family to deal with that. But a diagnosis of autism in and of itself is not a tragedy. It's an observation. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, at least from my view. Again, I can't speak for the entire team. I speak for myself. Neurodiversity is a boy thing and only happens to kids. That is not true. You're born with it, and it's there all your life. You can overcome some of it, you can compensate for it, but it's always going to be there. And like she said, the struggle is real. The boy thing, it is true that like 4 times as many boys are diagnosed with autism as girls. But that's mostly because it presents completely different in girls. With girls, we're better at masking, and and the special interests we get tend to be the things that a lot of girls are into, like horses or fashion or whatever. And so it gets overlooked. And for that reason, a lot of women are not diagnosed until adulthood. Non-speaking autistics can't communicate or understand what's going on around them. That is not true. Obviously, before there's communication, it's hard to tell what's going on, but there are non-speaking autistics who are on the board, who are writers, who are on the board of corporations. They can communicate perfectly well. What they need is assistive technology. Autistics don't feel emotions. Well, I can vouch for the fact that we do feel emotions, and we can feel them really deeply. But sometimes we have trouble reading your emotions, and we have trouble knowing really exactly how to talk about them, but that doesn't mean they're not there. You're not really trying. I spent my entire life trying as hard as I could. And no matter how hard I tried, I could never quite get the hang of life generally. It is not true that we're not really trying. We are trying so hard. And the best analogy I've heard is that having autism is like living in double gravity. So that everything is hard. Taking a shower takes so much energy, everything. And so it's hard because walking in double gravity is hard. And that's just the fact of it. The best outcome is for neurodivergents to learn to act like neurotypicals. To an extent, yes, people have to learn how to function in society. But for example, something like stimming, that's a cultural thing. That isn't necessarily what needs to stop in order for them to be effective. The best outcome is to work with somebody's brain and figure out how to work with it, as opposed to trying to change it into somebody that they're not. And then autistics or savants are very smart. Fill in your own stereotype. Everybody is different. There are some who are smart. There are some who are not so smart. Sometimes what seems smart is just because of the special interest, and they're really, really into it. But the bottom line is, and this is sort of a saying in the autistic community, if you've met one autistic, you've met one. So everybody is different. The best thing to do is ask. And there won't be any one answer. It will work for one person, it will work for another, and it will could even change from day to day. Okay, so now let's talk more about the challenges. First of all, let's talk about sensory issues. Here we go. Okay, so sensory could be not just averse to sensory stimuli, but also attracted to it. So for example, loud sounds, background noise, hand dryers in the restroom. Okay.
Drilling, for example?
Drilling, yes, that does qualify, but I think that qualifies for everybody, so I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one here. On the other hand, there can be certain sounds that are really soothing, right? So same with sight, bright lights, bright colors. I love glitter, I like bright colors, but a lot of people can't handle it. Touch, fabric. I cannot touch rough canvas. I can't touch French terry cloth. I don't know why, but there's just certain things that just, on the other hand me soft suede, and I'm just like, I could do that all day. Taste. Oh, also with touch. Also, foods, hot and cold water, tags in your clothes are a big one. I could never wear lace when I was a little kid. So taste, textures, things like that. I don't eat okra because it's slimy. No, I'm pretty sure I'm not alone in that. but that's sort of the idea. And then fragrances, smells. Some people can't take any of it. Some people really like it. I happen to really be drawn to fragrances, so I'm fine with like if my laundry smells like soap and stuff. So how do you accommodate for that? If you see somebody wearing headphones, it doesn't mean they're not paying attention. It may be that they need to do that in order to concentrate on what's going on. It may be that they have, I'm not sure what musicians' headphones look like, but I know that those allow other noise to come in, so that's a possibility. Same with if you see sunglasses, they may need them. Lower wattage. My office now has a dimmer switch, which I love. And just basically the kind of light that you have in an officer's classroom can really have an effect. Fluorescent lighting tends to be hard on most autistics, and if they buzz, I don't hear it, but a lot of people do, and it makes them crazy, and I can understand why. Control surrounding noise, consider changing officer study setup. So this is one of the little, I think we actually have a name for what these are.
Book nooks.
Book nooks, thank you. In the library. That is tailor-made for me. You know, a study carrel might be better for somebody else. Every person is going to be different, but accommodating them means giving them the space that they feel most comfortable in and that they can concentrate in.
Then I have a question. So in reference to the noise canceling headphones,
Mm-hmm.
if someone does have a situation where they have to go through accessibility services, then they would let the professors know that they might need that in the classroom, as opposed to someone just saying, "Oh, I'm just listening to music."
You
Do
know,
you know if that's on that plan?
yeah, I mean, if you want the accommodations, you do have to go through disability services. On the other hand, I guess I'm asking you to assume, to not make assumptions if you see somebody wearing headphones, to not assume that they're just doing it to listen to music. Not everybody likes to disclose their status because there is a lot of stigma. When I told my brother I had been diagnosed with autism, he was like, "Well, for God's sake, don't tell anybody," you know. So I guess I'm just asking you to just watch your assumptions a little bit. But yes, if you want the accommodations officially, you do have to disclose to access services. Okay, let's talk about stimming. Stimming is a really important accommodation you can make for people. It's one of the things that, especially in olden days, treatment of autism was designed to stop stimming. You know, don't wiggle, don't flap your hands, don't make those noises, don't get up and move around. But the thing is, that's what helps us focus, and everybody has a different way to do it. Obviously, if it's disruptive, you know, if it's like doing this, that's not okay, right? But if it's something, you know, different that's quiet, if you're teaching a class and somebody in the back of the room is flapping or getting up and walking around or turning in circles or whatever, it may be annoying, but it's not disruptive if they're in the back of the room. So the annoyance is your problem, you know. If it's disruptive, though, absolutely, there's you know, we definitely need to handle that. So this is the audio visual portion of my presentation. These are for you. You can keep them. These are some typical stimming toys. I have a fidget thing also, but you know, it's quiet. If I do it under the table, nobody's going to know. But there are some people who think it's a really terrible idea for me to have this stuff. And what I'm saying is that if it helps me work, then just let me have it. Okay.
It's
so,
not me. That's
no, you're really good. She's great. She's great. So here's another very short video, and I'm not going to watch the whole thing, but I told you that stimuli can be attractive as well as repellent. And so I wanted to just give you a feel for what it feels like, and the best thing I could think of was a dominoes thing. So I don't know if we can get this to work.
Do you have a link to click on to get to
I
it?
don't actually.
What happens if you just click on the video? Does it do anything?
Let's see. No, it goes to the next screen.
No.
But I can, this is not the same one, but I can, it's not really the one I want. That's okay.
You might have to come over to the other screen to do it. Click over here.
this is fine. This is actually a different one. There are some people who find this really soothing. I don't because of the noise. I was trying to find examples of things that would be like really short to watch that would be like, and this is like so annoying to me that I did this, but that part of life, you know, that stuff feels really good to us. Thank you. Okay, so now I need to get my screen back. Sharona, thank you so much. You're not allowed to leave. You have to stay here forever.
All right, I'll keep it in mind.
Yeah.
This one?
Yeah.
Is it, hang on.
Yeah, we're not going to look at any more links. I just need to get back to the screen.
Oh, do we want to look at this one?
Oh, yeah, this one I like, actually.
There's just this
That's
thing in the
okay.
way.
Let's just,
No,
yeah.
it's fine. I can get it. It's just.
Yeah, this one is only 30 seconds long, so if we can get it, great. If we
Yeah,
can't,
I got it.
okay. I don't know what this thing is, but it looks like fun. It doesn't take much to entertain us. Okay. So
Thinking that
that's,
someone's hand is really in there.
yeah, right, I know. Probably is. Yeah.
It reminds me of whack-a-mole for some reason.
Yeah. All right. So that was social, and we spent a lot of time on that on the sensory stuff. But let's move on to communication. I think we're good on time. So we tend to take things very, very literally. So, for example, if I used to get in trouble when I was a kid because I would be visiting somebody and I would say, well, do you need any help? And they'd say no, but they really meant yes. And so I wouldn't help, and then I'd get complaints to my parents because I didn't help. You kind of have to be direct with people. We may have trouble reading faces and other social cues. And again, none of this applies to everybody. Everybody's different. There are going to be some people who have none of this stuff but have other challenges. They may have trouble knowing what's rude, difficulty in remembering faces. It was like, I don't know if I should tell this. It was like 6 times that I met the vice provost before I figured out that's who he was. And I'm like, oh, the boss. It's that kind of thing where it just takes me a while. And also short-term memory issues. So some ways to help: write things down. Don't try to do directions in a bunch of different steps at a time. If you're doing a recipe, do one sentence at a time. If you're doing, if you're giving a phone number, don't try to give the whole thing at once. I can't remember the entire phone number. Things like that. Be ready to answer questions. Don't assume that the person remembers what you said recently or remembers who they're talking to if they've met them before. And then in terms of intentions, give them the benefit of the doubt. That doesn't mean you don't set boundaries and rudeness is not okay, but don't just assume that they're being jerks because it may just be that they don't know. Okay, so this is my real life example. I go to somebody's house and they're making a salad, and this has actually happened to me. Well, it's happened to everybody, I guess. So they say, yeah, please cut up some tomatoes for me. That means almost nothing to me. I know that it involves tomatoes, but how many tomatoes? What shape do you want them in? What size do you want them in? Do you want it big? Do you want it small? Do you want it square? Do you want a triangle? I spent my whole life not wanting to help people because I would not know what the answer was to this. What do you do with the little green thing? Some people keep it, some people don't. I don't know where to keep it. So now I'm still embarrassed, but I now ask, how do you want them cut? You know, how do you want the bacon laid in the pan? I need that kind of specificity.
Specifically with measurements.
Yes.
Like how much is some olive oil?
Yeah,
Do you
exactly.
put a little bit of mint in it. Well, is it in ounces? How many ounces? Is it half a cup? Is it a cup? How many pounds?
Right. Exactly. What kind of oil? Yeah. So socializing is similar. They can be really overwhelming. Not all autistics are introverted, but they do. It does take a lot of energy to manage, especially in social situations. So they may need to limit their time in social settings. The best thing to do is to kind of let them pick the pace and the how much they're going to participate. Also, let everybody know what to expect. If there's going to be team building activities, provide the questions in advance, because I can tell you from experience it's a very, very uncomfortable feeling when you get surprised. And it's not so much that I can't do the activity, it's that I freeze up because I didn't expect it. So knowing what's coming is really helpful. Don't judge performance based on eye contact or other social cues unless it's essential to the task at hand. Allow people to sit things out, and then also provide a quiet space if possible, so that otherwise you won't have use of bathrooms because somebody will be in there all the time. Okay, and then we also have trouble adjusting to changes. Changes in routine, generally surprises aren't necessarily a comfortable thing for us. So best to give advance notice whenever you can. Be willing to kind of repeat things if you need to. And then executive functions, which the video talked a little bit about. Essentially, the simplest way I can think of to define it is it's adulting. You know, it's like getting the bills paid, sitting down and getting things done, planning your time. I have real problem with this stuff. Getting started, remembering instructions, things like that. So how can you help with that? If the person has a journal or calendar or whatever that works for them, use them. Have them write things down. You write things down. Make things very specific. Be willing to repeat yourself. And if the person seems stuck, sometimes I'll just get stuck and I'm not quite sure what to do. It is okay, usually, it would depend on the person, if you ask them, do you need some help deciding what to do next? And respect the person's limitation. If they tell you you're not good at planning parties, I am not good at planning parties. If I have to, I will, but you really don't want me to. You know, it will get done, but it definitely won't be seamless. Okay, so physical challenges. This was something that really surprised me. I have always been a klutz, and I didn't understand that it had anything to do with autism, but it does. Dyspraxia is, I guess it's a comorbidity. It's essentially you don't understand where your body is in the space. So it can affect large motor skills or small motor skills. So for example, sometimes I have trouble coordinating a knife and a fork. It takes me a couple of minutes to get them in the right hands. I fall a lot, and sometimes I break. I am, as I said up there, it used to be called clumsy child syndrome, which is really charming. And that pretty much describes my childhood, actually. So how to help with that? Be flexible about shoes. That's my own personal thing, I guess. And no, Sarah is very flexible about shoes. Essentially, just listen to them. You know, if they say they don't want to play softball for the team, don't make them play softball because they probably have a really good reason for not wanting to do that. Even if they do it, it's super traumatic. You know, if they're not comfortable doing it. And then try not to present too many distractions during physical activity. This is something, if the person has dyspraxia, this is different from ADHD, where, you know, she said it would help to talk over stuff. For me, I need to be paying attention to walking. and holding onto handrails and stuff. I can talk, but I can't have like an important conversation. That needs to wait until we get where we're going. So, and then finally, just a couple of issues for students. People who are coming here from high school may have lost social services once they graduated from high school. So that's something to keep in mind. That's an adjustment. And I'm not really sure what services are available. That wasn't part of what I was trying to, provide for you guys. But just do keep that in mind, that this could be a really difficult time for them. And then, as I said before, they're likely to have been bullied, so keep that in mind as well. And that is my presentation. So I am open for questions, and I guess we have 10 minutes. So I will open it up to you guys.
Would you say that autism affects sense of humor, or is it different in terms of?
It really can, yes. Sarcasm sometimes, you don't get it. Some people are better at it than others. I'm old now, so but recently I asked somebody, they said, oh no, and I was like, and I had to ask them, are you being sarcastic, or do you actually mean I don't need help? I don't always see it. I don't always know when something's funny. I can watch the audience to see are they laughing, and then I know, oh, okay, that's what it means. So yes, it can for some people.
Can I share not a question, but a thought?
Absolutely.
So when you were talking about, like, I forgot which slide it was on, but like getting questions for things in advance, it reminded me of something. So if people don't already know and know me, I am leaving to go to another job at the end of this month. But the reason I'm saying that is there was something that happened when I interviewed for that job that I really liked and I thought was a really good idea. And I would hope that more people could do it, which was when I got to the part of the interview with the search committee, I had a short break beforehand and they gave me the questions they were about to ask me. So I had maybe like 10 minutes to look them over. I thought that was really, really nice. And it's kind of like, they didn't give it to me like days in advance where I could sit there and like plot out these careful answers, but like I had a little bit of time to get myself together, and it wasn't like you were talking about where it's kind of sprung on you. I thought it was kind of a nice way of like, even for people who aren't autistic, kind of like wanting to see them at their best, but especially in terms of accommodations, if somebody is like neurodiverse or struggles with that type of thing, it seems like that could be a really useful way to like provide some of those accommodations and make like a pleasant interview experience for somebody so that they do have a little bit of time to kind of think through that and prepare themselves. And it's not so like, it's not quite as stressful as it might be otherwise. And you really do get to see them at their best.
Yeah.
So it kind of reminded me of that when you were talking about getting questions for like an activity.
Yeah, and I totally advocate for that. That is actually one of the recommended accommodations for hiring, is to give the questions in advance. And that's because, if you ask me a question and I'm totally not expecting it, the fact that I can't answer it doesn't mean I'm not fit for the job. It just means that I can't handle
Some
that
people like
question at that time.
freeze up and they just can't, they might have an answer, but it's just on the spot.
Exactly.
But even just having those 10 minutes to like think it through a little bit can be really helpful, I think, especially if people are neurodiverse.
Yeah, definitely.
And unless the job is for crisis management,
right,
most tasks in your job, you have a minute to kind of think about something before you make a decision.
Yeah.
Right.
So
like you really,
you don't need a aha at your job interview.
Right. Like the purpose of an interview isn't to like catch somebody out and like trick them. Right.
Right.
You want to see their actual skills and abilities.
Yeah.
So.
It's interesting you bring this up because I remember when I was on my way out of grad school and I went to something called the placement exchange. And there was one school who legitimately had all of the interview questions right in front of me during the interview.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it interesting that you brought that up. It just went full circle with something I went through like a few years. Wow. I've been out of grad school for over 6 years.
Time flies, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, even just having the questions like in front of you can make a difference.
Gives people, it levels the playing field.
Yeah, it does. It does. It really does. Any other questions or comments?
I was wondering, Lynn, what might be some common writing issues? You know, working in the writing center, of course, and you know, if I am helping a student, whether the student has, you know, come out and let us know that he or she is autistic, what might be some of the common problems that we might encounter?
That's a great
with
question.
writing?
For me, it would have been breaking things down into very small pieces. So instead of saying, well, let's make an outline, say, okay, so first, you know, you're going to want an introduction. And the second, what's the main idea of your, you know, basically just breaking it out into tiny little pieces like that. Another thing that helped me was to outline after I've done the writing, because then I see that stuff doesn't fit. Essentially, though, since everybody is different, it's a matter of asking what they need. But for me, it's break it down into tiny little pieces.
Do you think one thing, because you talked about being confused with directions or needing something more literal, like could that also be a thing of just helping the student interpret the assignment?
Definitely.
I don't know if that's something that an autistic student might struggle with, is just like breaking down what the assignment means.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a really good
And
point.
we do that. We do that anyway.
Yeah.
But some often know that you can tell that a student isn't quite understanding the prompt.
Like maybe they need
really
it at like a different level.
And then just to keep breaking it down and coming at it from different angles, I suppose.
Yeah, it's not a matter of intelligence. It's a matter of just how that information is processed.
Can I ask how you found out that you were autistic, or how
Sure.
how old you were? You've been so generous to share your story with us.
I actually was formally diagnosed less than a year ago. I found a doctor in Rochester who evaluates adults. It's actually really hard to find somebody. You know, I had some people say, well, if you didn't know it before, you know, then you're certainly not autistic. And it's a fairly intense thing. It was like 3 visits with lots and lots of questions and all of that. And basically going over my past, you know, bringing in, a lot of times they'll talk to your parents if they're still around to see if it translates from what was, I had childhood pictures, you know, with me not smiling and you know, that kind of thing. I think. Go ahead.
I'm curious what kind of camera you got.
Oh, it's a Canon M50. It's supposed to be delivered today. Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it.